back to our decking series.
Thanks, man.
Hey, this is a topic you and I have talked about a number of times over the years. I thought we could touch on the idea of resurfacing a deck, basically changing your deck boards versus rebuilding. So I was hoping you could maybe share some of the considerations that somebody should think about when they're going to do that, and maybe some of the conversations you've had with clients over the years when that topic's on the table.
There's a lot to that conversation.
Loaded question.
It's a loaded question, and it's the answer that you've been getting a lot from me is depends on the deck. I think the first thing you got to look at is how old is the deck, and depending on who you talk to, you'll get different answers. If it was built correctly, and when I say correctly, the right lumber, pressure treated lumber for framing, and end cut solution painted on it, and everything was done correctly when it was built. You know, my rule of thumb when I'm talking to a homeowner is if it's 15 years or less and it was built correctly, you're probably fine. There's a few things we'll do to that framework to prepare it for new decking, but you're probably fine. If it's 20 years or older, I'm recommending that they seriously consider replacing the framework, mostly because most people, at least in the Northwest, are going with synthetic decking. Most of that comes with a 30-year warranty. And chances are, if you've got a 20-year-old deck, of it making another 30 years is slim. So I don't think and most of your money is in that decking material. The finished product is what costs most of the money on a deck. So do you really want to put a really expensive, brand new spanky deck on something that might last another 12 years? And then there you are, you got to replace the whole thing now.
Okay.
So I have done some redecks on decks that are over 20 years, but it's usually a homeowner that's pretty set on that. And in that case, and actually in any case with a redeck, we always will go through and we'll repaint end cut solution wherever we can get it to wherever cuts have been made, so it'll soak in. And as you know, there's a tape that goes over the top of the joists and the beam. So we'll go over and tape everything we can, and it's to prevent moisture from getting down in those areas where eventually it can create issues and create dry rot. And that way you get years more life out of the deck. And then you can redeck that. Okay. But the other thing you got to think about with redecking, especially if you're going from a wood deck to synthetic deck, is what is the top of those joists doing? How flush are they to each other? When you put a wood deck over the top, well, as you know, framing lumber varies a little bit. So when they're milling out, say, a 2x8 or a 2x10 joist, you can actually run a tape on them, and sometimes they'll vary 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch as far as how tall they are. That's a bunch.
Sure.
So with a wood deck, you don't really notice that because cedar has a structural strength to it.
Especially if it's a 2x product, right? It kind of bridge a little bit more.
You don't really notice any humps or dips. Okay. But boy, when you're putting a synthetic deck, they're not known as structural, so they'll settle into that existing joist. And a lot of what we do when we build a new deck is we spend a lot of time getting the tops of those joists flush, even to the point of running a power planer in the places we just can't adjust from the bottom side. But it's all about how do the tops look. So before you start redecking with a synthetic, you're going to really want to go through there and figure out what you got. Otherwise, you'll end up with a deck that has dips and humps.
So that's a conversation you're having when you talk about resurfacing. Hey, when we get this off, we're going to need to evaluate it. Even if it's in good shape, if it's doing a lot of this, we're going to have hours in prepping that.
That's part of the presentation when we're out to do a bid and they want to do redeck. That's one of the first things I talk about.
I'm glad you brought that up, Joel, because the one thing, a little bit of a pet peeve for me, a lot of decks that were built longer ago, built 24-inch on center, joist centers, spacing. And you know, the manufactured decking now, for the most part, it's all recommended to go no more than 16. And the common answer for people is, oh, well, just add a joist in between. Well, as you mentioned in the new build, that lumber varies. It's got a lot of moisture content. So now you've got maybe a 15-year-old, everything's bone dry for the most part if you're building in dry time of year. And now you're putting a new joist in the middle. And maybe you true them up right now and you lay your manufactured decking on it, but how it looks 6, 8 months, a year from now, I mean, who knows what's going on?
You're right on the money. That's exactly why you don't want to do that, at least with a synthetic deck. Because right, you spend all that time getting it just right, and then that 20 to 30% moisture content of that new joist, it goes down over time, and next thing you know, you've got a little bit of this going on. And once it's there, it's hard to fix.
I would think, even if they brought you back a year later and you had the room to get under the deck and try to fuss with it, I think you'd have some issues once those boards took a little bit of a set.
Yeah, and like I say, the framing lumber isn't the most expensive part of the project. It's your decking. So if you're going to, redeck an existing deck with, like an all plastic product or a capstock product, it's well worth considering. If you're on 24-inch centers, just rebuild it.
Yeah.
My gosh, so you buy new joists, maybe your beam and posts are still good. But that way you've got the same lumber, same age, same moisture content. It's all running at the same time, and that'll minimize any of those aesthetic issues that you'd have if you didn't.
Let me run this scenario by you. I bring you out. I want to hire you to resurface my deck. Oh, and by the way, I want to change the configuration and I want to redo my stairs. I'm assuming that makes the rebuild kind of a no-brainer at that stage, just because you're going to be doing all this work and this additional work.
If the addition is at the same level, then yeah, probably. But there are things you can do. So maybe you're going to a 2-level deck. I want to kick an addition out and it's going to be 1 or 2 steps down. Then why not? So what? Because they're not at the same level, you're not going to have that blend issue.
Okay.
And stairs coming off a deck, if you're rebuilding the stairs, I don't see that as a big issue because you're not actually tied into the surface once again and trying to blend too. So you can probably do a rebuild on the stairs. We've done that a number of times, and a different level deck. Or you might even be able to divide the deck with a board, put a divider board in there so they meet different. I'd still be a little concerned over time that it's when you went to synthetic decking, what decks turned out to be were pianos. People wanted them perfect. Every little cut and every little thing shows. So whenever, even if you're blended flush now and things go down just a little bit, I'll guarantee you somebody's going to notice that.
Yeah.
So a lot of attention to detail up front just saves so many hassles.
Yeah, you're right. Manufactured products, it's tough. We really try, and I know you do as well, try to set proper expectations because people think it just comes out of a factory, well, it's going to be perfect. Well, there's a lot of things that go into it. Those factories, they run when it's 15 degrees outside and they run when it's 98 degrees outside and they're trying to, calibrate it, and they get different raw materials and people are involved, heaven forbid. So, things happen. The thing I wanted to close out with you on this segment was I think you can verify or not verify, but it seems like probably a lot of people come to you with the idea that resurfacing my deck is a whole lot less expensive than rebuilding my deck. Is that a fair statement? Not so much. You talked about all the prep that goes into getting it ready to put a new surface on. So can you share a little bit on that?
Definitely. We get phone calls for, can't we just redeck it? And what we'll normally do is we'll set up a bid. And I almost always have that conversation on the phone about how old is the deck and how was it built. And that we'll come out and we'll do an inspection and then we'll tell you. We'll give you our honest opinion on that. There have been times where we've gotten down to that we're just not sure and they really want to redeck. So when we're doing a bid on a redeck and a customer is pretty set on doing it and the deck is over 20 years, we'll bid it in such a way that it's got both options. In other words, if we open it up, we're going to, because we can do an inspection when the deck's on there, the existing decking's on there, but there's all kinds of things we're going to find when we pull that off that we just can't see. Yeah. So we'll just prep the homeowner. Go, when we pull this off, we're going to do another thorough inspection. And, worst case, this is what it's going to cost if we have to replace everything. So they go in knowing that there's a chance that we're not going to be able to fulfill that. And quite honestly, if it's just, well, no, I don't care, a lot of times we'll walk away from that because there's nothing worse than getting involved with a project when you know it's going to have issues and fail. Yeah. And yeah,
because then you've got a product out there built by your brand, and due to the relationship, you can't make it look like it should, and people are going to see it. Who built that deck?
There's just a point where you got to make a choice to do it right.
Yeah.
You can do a redeck on a lot of decks, Don't get me wrong, and it does save you money. There's nothing wrong with saving money, and reusing stuff. That's good use of our resources.
You bet.
I actually like that. But get all the information so that you know what if you're risking buying this expensive decking, and maybe your old deck isn't going to last the life of that new decking. Is that worth it to you? That risk?
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we covered that segment. I think it's going to be hugely valuable for our viewing audience. Thank you, sir.
You bet.